And we have an agenda, but before we get to the agenda, we would like to start by saying the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Good evening again. My name is Brian Kirby. I'm the Vice Chair of the Citizens Communication Council, and I will be sort of running the meeting pursuant to the agenda. The first item on our agenda for this evening is updates from the PEG channels in the area. However, in speaking with Molly Gallagher, we understand that unfortunately none of the representatives were able to attend tonight's meeting. So I think we are going to skip that agenda item for now and move on to item number 2. And
excuse me, Brian.
Sure.
Last month we spoke about the PEG channel, and we asked that someone be a representative from them. Part of it was in a September discussion that we wanted to have more input into the PEG channels, specifically Radnor Studio 21. So I would like to have something read into the record.
To what effect, as far as, I mean, the fact that they're not here, or that they were invited and didn't attend, or what would you like to have read into the record?
To what effect? I believe that the Radnor Studio 21 should come under the auspices of this Communications Council. I believe that Radnor Studio 21 receives in grants in a 5-year period over $1 million from Radnor Township. And in exchange for that, and I'm speaking from a voice of knowledge and experience, so I'm not some guy from Ward 3 who just came on here. I understand the nuances and idiosyncrasies. And in exchange for that $1 million over a 5-year period, Radnor Studio 21 has no viewers, no brand, no sponsors, no followers, and produces nothing. Nothing for $1 million. I believe that Radnor Studio 21 is financially and operationally mismanaged. The last manager that they hired, they paid $75,000 a year for his services, and he produced nothing. Again, I'm speaking from experience and my own success as a documentarian. I believe that if we dissolved the board of directors at Radnor Studio 21, and put a board on of the Communications Council and possibly 3 members from the Historical Society if they were so interested, and a spokesperson from Lower Merion and Narberth, we'd have an organized channel. We would have education, direction, marketing, quality of the content, and development and production documentaries. I want to further say this, as far as when I make a comment about financially and operationally mismanaged, Radnor Studio 21 invites hosts who are non-residents and have no standing in our respective communities of Radnor, Lower Merion, and Narberth. They come from Philadelphia, Westchester, Chester County, Upper Merion, and Havertown. I'm not going to name names, but I know who they are. They produce content at the expense of Radnor Township, put it on either their website, or they put it on or their social media status, and they sell it or raise money for it. That's not right. That's not fair to the community. That's not fair to the township, and it's not fair at all. If they have lived in Philadelphia, and the one particularly does, comes on our channel, if he would go to PhillyCam and do that, he'd have to pay. But instead, we as Radnor citizens have to provide him with that. So I would like this board to consider having more control, specifically this board become the board of directors at Radnor Studio and produce something worthwhile. Thank you.
I have a comment on this agenda item as well, if I could. I wanted to have this agenda item here for us so that we have a space in the Citizens Communication Council meetings for the public to hear updates from each of the PEG channels, the public, the educational, and the government channels, and to provide a space so that the commissioners could also have updates on whatever each of the PEG channels wants to report on. And I think it's really good that we have this on our agenda so that there's a space for that kind of information sharing. And then also, I think it would be important to determine with each of those parties, Mainline TV, Radnor Township School District TV, and Radnor TV, the government channel, to work with them to find out from their designee what's the best process for providing an update for the community and for the commissioners. Could it be quarterly, at least annually, but that we talk together with them? And then also in concert with the Board of Commissioners, how frequently would they want to have updates from each of those channels, just so we can keep informing the community more about all of the rich offerings that each of those channels provides to the public. And we'll talk about in the further agenda item about the needs assessment report and just the detail of all of the richness that each of those channels provides to the township, to the residents, and that the residents are able to participate in their various constituencies, whether they're residents, students, or how our own township staff manages the TV station here. So there's really a lot of richness there to share. So I am glad that we have this on our agenda, and I know that the notice necessarily was very short. You know, us getting our agenda together and getting it out to these 3 channels in time so that a representative could come. I know the time was just a little bit too tight. I think they only received the agenda yesterday or today. So in terms of trying to have somebody come, it's not because they don't want to be here, it's just that the time was short. We're still getting ourselves organized even. So I think that's fair to say. So I do think it's good to have this on our agenda. And I'm looking forward to having designee from each of the channels come and just give us updates. You know, what's happening lately, some metrics, things like that. That would be useful to us, and then also to our residents who we represent, and then the commissioners as well. Thank you.
I think that's a good point that you're making. I mean, we historically have had this opportunity for the channels to present, representative to come in and present information. And to your point, the council sort of lost its way for a period of time, and we're kind of getting back up into the swing of things. I mean, I would say from the standpoint of notice for representatives of the channels, I think really they should sort of expect unless and until we arrive at an agreement with the channels or through their input and discussion as far as like a different sort of time frame for reporting. I think it would make sense for them to expect to come to this meeting and report if they have something to report, so that it be a regular basis on which they're coming in to report, and we're getting that information. So that the notice wouldn't be an issue as far as it would be, this item would be on the agenda virtually every meeting unless we, as I say, we have some discussion and decide, no, we don't need to have them come that frequently, maybe quarterly or every other month or something along those lines. With respect to your comments, John, let me just clarify. So you're saying that residents are coming from outside the township, or individuals are coming from outside the township, coming into Radnor 21, effectively making or producing material, film material or whatnot, and then they're taking that material and they're putting it up on sites or commercial websites or selling it commercially or making money from it?
Yeah, that's correct. They have no standing in our community. The channel is designed to to have residents of Radnor Township, Lower Merion, or Narberth to produce content. Residents of non-residents historically have not been allowed to come in and produce content. So there are, again, they'll remain unnamed. They produce content and they put it up on their websites. I've watched it. I have a marketing person that works with me on our own production material. And she reports back to me that this person living in Westchester is raising money for her cause. Not at our expense. I know a book author who comes on. There's someone from the Bruno Brothers that's doing a show in Radnor. The Bruno Brothers has a facility in Philadelphia. Why don't they go to Philly Cam? You know why? You got to pay for it. Here it's free. It's wrong. It's wrong. Should be eliminated.
Well, with respect to the Bruno Brothers, I know they have a facility in Wayne right now, but details on that aside, I mean, some of the allegations you're making are very serious, and, you know, obviously, we have, you know, the rest of the council members here don't have firsthand knowledge of that, of those allegations or what's going on, so I think we need to, you know, we need to get the representative in here from Radnor TV and question and find out, you know, get some detail on what's going on and get to the bottom of that. With respect to replacing the board of Radnor 21, I'm not sure that we as an entity have the ability to say, you're out and we're in. I mean, I think that's something, you know, I don't think that that's within our unilateral authority to do, but
Well,
I mean, from what you're saying, it does sound like there are potentially some serious problems or issues that we need to get to the bottom of, and I think we need to have a representative or representatives from Radnor 21 appear and give them the opportunity to answer some of these questions and to provide some information and to explain themselves.
And if
then
I
we
could-
can, and then we can figure out what our ability is to do something from that point going forward.
Yeah, and just one more comment. I think it is appropriate to, as a member of the Citizens Communication Council, to be able to express your opinion, but I would feel that it would be more appropriate if there were a representative from the organization here before we would engage in such a conversation or statements or anything.
why isn't someone here? Why isn't someone? I mean, that was part of our discussion. I mean, if
They
we
were.
could do this again next month. and
I know
there'll be
I know the representatives were invited, and we'll make a point of, you know, putting this agenda item on next month's agenda, and
Okay.
I would ask Molly to make sure that the representatives of each channel get notice very well in advance of their invitation to, you know, invitation/request to come and appear before the council so that we can, you know, hear their reports, and also, to the extent that we feel it's warranted, question them on certain issues.
So I'll just weigh in real quickly. As the agenda wasn't ready until yesterday evening at 6:30, inherently that was short notice. However, they were very kind and interested in attending future meetings. Kevin from Mainline TV 21 indicated that he will consult with Ann, since she's also a member of their board, and that he says here if she's attending, Ann might be able to shed some light on any related questions for the time being in his absence.
And just to clarify, as a member of the Citizens Communication Council, I know Kevin is the manager at Mainline TV, but I don't know who the representatives would be from Radnor Township School District or our own Radnor Government TV, because at least the one person who is the representative is now recording this meeting. So I don't know who that would be. So I just feel like we're in the beginning of the process of getting ourselves organized and determining how we want to function, how it would be useful to provide information to the residents, as I was saying. So I myself don't even know who two of the three representatives might be, or if Kevin were able to come, or a designee. So I just feel like we're at the beginning of shaping up this process, which I think maybe if we can get things a little bit further along for the next meeting, that would be great. But I think this is just indicative of where we are, which I think it's okay.
So for the school district, Ms. Brennan is the acting director of communications. She indicated that she believed she would be taking Michael Petiti's role, and she'd like to be kept posted on future meetings, but that she cannot attend tonight.
And just one more question. Do we know who would be the township representative to report?
I'm sure it would likely be Ian or myself, and I will clarify that with the township manager.
Any other questions or comments on this item before we move on?
I'm just wondering if, given the allegations that John posed, if we might want to give them a little bit more notice than even just a month, and also perhaps request a written report to the board so that they can, even in their absence, give us an idea of what's going on. I feel like if there are serious allegations in one of the three pegs, it's going to take a little bit of time to unravel things or just talk it out with them. I don't think it's going to be a one-meeting thing, I would like more information. That's, I guess, where I am. I'm very in the dark as to all these things going on. Over the last couple of years, we haven't really met during the pandemic much, so I think that what we really need to do is gather some concrete evidence, or not evidence, but like reports from them, and also hear their anecdotal comments in person, if that's possible.
I think what might be helpful, John, is if you could maybe put together something in writing for the council and just summarizing what you addressed in your comments in terms of what you feel are the issues in terms of inappropriate use of studio facilities, for example, or mismanagement or whatnot. If you could kind of give us a summary of those, and then perhaps we can reach out to, in advance of the meeting, we can present Radnor 21 with a sort of a written summary of those and request for a representative who has knowledge to appear and respond to the allegations as stated and be willing to answer questions from council members. All right?
Done.
Okay. All right, so just final, putting a bow on it. So John will put together a summary of what he feels is occurring inappropriately or mismanagement at Radnor 21 for the rest of the council, and we will follow that up with a communication from the council to Radnor 21 asking for a representative to attend and address the issues and be open to answering questions. All right. Moving on to the next agenda item is item number 2, which is the PEG Needs Assessment Report, which incorporates a review process for determining the 5G recipient among the 3 PEG channels. And we were, in reference to this topic, we were asked to review a report that was put together by the Cohen Law Firm around the PEG channel, the 5G award process and the PEG needs and so on. So I'm open to hear council members' comments with respect to item agenda number 2.
Well, I can begin. I walked through the report, and first of all, the PEG Needs Assessment Report was completed in 2017. Some of the interviews that were held with members of each of the 3 PEG channels were conducted in 2016. So the report itself is it's jam-packed with data. I think it's a really useful report, but we have to acknowledge that it's dated. So similar to what I'm saying about the PEG channel updates, I would be in favor of having the Citizens Communication Council facilitate a process to have updates provided from each of the TV channels so that we have those updates. just to have some current information. And really, again, it also including the representatives from each of those channels in the process so that it's a useful and productive process. I know because I am a board member of Mainline TV that much of the equipment has been updated. The studio has been completely redesigned. It's beautiful. It was completed by the late Vince Celli, the prior general manager prior to Kevin. And so that is just completely updated. So the list for at least Mainline TV of all the equipment updates that need to occur, mostly all of them, I would say, have occurred, but I don't know for sure. So if we had updates from representatives from each of the channels on those sections of the needs assessment report, I think that would be useful for us, and then also the public.
Okay, so yeah, and you would basically, we would take what's in the report and basically provide it to them and ask them to provide updated information for us so that we were reviewing timely information. And to your point, to the extent that certain needs or issues have been already addressed, we would know that and wouldn't have to concern ourselves with that.
Yep, the report is about 80 pages long, so Radnor TV is evaluated first by the Cohen Group starting on page 3, and then Radnor Township School District TV is beginning on page 14, and then Mainline TV begins on page 22, and then there's a whole bunch of appendices in that same order. So I don't think it's too onerous a task to ask each of those to review their section and then just give us an update since what have you been able to accomplish since 2017. But it's a really great report. Just provides so much detail on even exactly what equipment is needed at the high school, what locations in the township should have connections, like the Radnor Memorial Library, all of the schools, so that you can have programming from all of the locations, and other locations as well. But that was something that the Cohen Group pointed out as being really significant, so that we could be much more connected as a township and have much more programming and then just access.
If I could just add to that, I'd also like, when I'm hearing things tonight, what's going on with staff changes both at the school district and at Radnor Studio 21 with Kevin taking over for Vince and Mrs. Brenna taking over of the school district. I'd just like to make sure that the new people who've come on, possibly since 2017, have this report and maybe are using it as a flight plan for the development of the studios and all of that, and maybe they can incorporate that in their report to us when they come.
I'm happy to send that to them.
Thank you, Molly.
Any other comments with respect to agenda item number 2? Okay, I think that's a good recommendation, Ian, to provide them the report and make sure that we have current data. So I think that, unless there's any objection, I think we as a committee should send them the report. I mean, Molly already said she would make sure they got it, but perhaps, Molly, it would go with a request from us that the report be updated with current information, and to the extent that needs that are identified in the report have already been addressed, that they note that, so we're aware of that.
That's great. That's perfect.
All right, moving on. Agenda item number 3, unfortunately, I think we're going to skip over that agenda item. My understanding is apparently the status of the Inverurie microcell network effort is, I guess, somewhat uncertain at the moment, and Commissioner Abel could not attend the meeting, and it was, apparently Molly I guess Commissioner Abel to Molly to me basically recommended that we just take this item off the agenda for the time being until we got further notice from either Commissioner Abel or from the Homeowners Association Inverurie. Is that right?
Yes, the commissioner was unable to attend, and he noted that he'd like to circle back with the HOA. So for the time being, until we hear, I'm not sure that it's an active agenda item, but if we hear any differently, I let him know we'd be happy to add it back onto the agenda.
All right, that's great. Thanks, Molly. Okay, so moving on to agenda item number 4. The Cohen firm had asked us to, I guess they're in the process of beginning negotiations on the Verizon franchise agreement, and we as a council have been asked to review the Comcast franchise agreement and the, I guess to some extent, the PEG needs assessment report for the purpose of identifying certain negotiating points or issues that we might want to, that we identify that we would want to make sure are addressed in the negotiations with Verizon that maybe weren't addressed in the negotiations with Comcast or were not addressed satisfactorily in those negotiations and the resulting agreement. I was hoping to have Art Hartel participate virtually for this portion of the proceedings, but apparently I know he got an invite to attend, and I'm not sure whether he was able to do so or not. But I would ask, does anybody have any, based on review of the franchise agreement or the PEG report, does anybody have any points that they would like to raise as far as possible negotiating points for the Verizon franchise agreement?
I have several, Brian. The first one that I'd like to address is under 3.2, the area to be served. These agreements are 10-year agreements, and in the timetable for internet productivity and things that are happening in the 5G world, that's a long period of time. So in 3.2, the area to be served bullet point talks about not serving residents who are 275 feet or more from a pole line. And I'm just wondering if that's reasonable in this day and time with 5G coming and all of that, and if that needs to be addressed as far, well, I guess my first question is, are there any Radnor residents who are not served by Comcast and Verizon? In this agreement, they're saying that if you're 275 feet or more from a pole line, you're not served. So I'm wondering if that applies to anyone in Radnor, first of all. And then secondly, if it does, should we be addressing that and making that, a not issue? Because I kind of feel personally that since the pandemic, one of the things that we've learned is, internet and TV are not a luxury anymore. It's a necessity for our households. And for a homeowner in Radnor not to be able to have access to it just doesn't seem feasible according to the words that are in this agreement 10 years ago.
Can we ask Verizon and Comcast to let us know if they have any homes that fit that condition?
Exactly. That's I guess what my question is.
Because that is something that they do track.
Okay.
They track buildings and homes that are actually connected, meaning that they have to do nothing more than put a drop from the utility pole to your home. So even if the line isn't there, it is something that's reasonable for install tech to do.
Right.
Versus,
Right.
A construction. So anyway, they have those numbers of homes passed versus total homes. They should be able to provide that.
Great. Yeah, I think we should ask them that and make sure that both agreements, when are updated, include something to encompass all residents, not, ignore outliers. I understood it 10 years ago, but, and none of us were on the council then, but today it just doesn't seem feasible for us to go that way. The next point that I'd like to address is under 3.8, repairs and restoration. I read through the entire agreement, and there doesn't seem to be any place in here that talks about, improvements and adding equipment and repairs and improvements if sidewalks or land or anything is disrupted. But it doesn't talk about removal of obsolete equipment once it's past its life, its livelihood in the internet, TV world. So what we're seeing in Radnor and a lot of neighborhoods is we still have some Ma Bell equipment hanging out there. And when you ask a Verizon or Comcast representative, like, well, can you take that big thing down in my backyard or whatever? Their answer is, well, it's not ours. And, we need to have a little bit more diligence from both of the vendors in removing obsolete equipment if it has no use going forward with their new equipment installations. I know we're doing 5G going forward, and I'm not a techno person, so I don't know if the old stuff's necessary to do the 5G, but if it's not, and all those wires are, can go away, then maybe we should be getting rid of them. They did an amazing job cleaning up the Wayne Business District. As I drive through there, if you drive down Lancaster Avenue, there's no wires to be seen for a couple blocks in the Wayne Business District. When you go deeper into Radnor, into our neighborhoods, it's like a wire jungle in some neighborhoods. And that's kind of not acceptable. I mean, I think that we should be getting rid of the obsolete equipment, and it either fits in section 3.8 or 9.2, but 9.2, it talks about removal of the system if we were to part ways with Verizon or Comcast, that they were to come in, get all their stuff and leave. So I'm kind of thinking that 3.8 is the place to put it, but I guess that would be up to the legal people to decide. It's just more the point I'm trying to make.
Are we able to inventory specific equipment that we identify as obsolete and then give that report to Verizon or Comcast to say, can you answer, is this obsolete or is it still in use?
I'm sorry, what was that?
Can we, so equipment, like, for example, the old equipment that you identified from Ma Bell, can we get like an inventory? How can we, so it goes from hearsay to like an actual report, and then have the individual company say, no, that is not ours, or it is ours and it's in use?
Yeah, I don't really know the answer to that. I think that's probably more of an engineering team discussion. However, I think every time they improve the system, some other things probably go away. And as a resident, I don't feel like the trash, the old poles, the big transformer things that aren't necessary anymore should be just hanging out there, obsolete and looking ugly in our neighborhoods. I mean, they were able to do it, and well, there's couple other points I want to make with underground utilities and things too, but they were able to clean up the Wayne Business District. Then when you drive down and you're in the Radnor financial, Radnor Hotel area, again, it's cleaned up. In between there, there's lots of old poles and lots of stuff still hanging out. Bryn Mawr is not addressed at all. So I don't know. I just think that perhaps it's not I don't know the answer. I don't know if it's a sweeping, we go through, like you said, and just give us an inventory of what's obsolete, or we find it ourselves, or if they just have them do it as they're going along. When you're improving something, take away the old thing that's not working anymore.
Yeah, I think if we ask specifically, here's exactly what we think is abandoned, and you should remove it because it's not being in use, or tell if it's in use. Unfortunately, and I can be wrong here, we're going to find that a lot of stuff that's on the poles is in use, mainly electric and capacitors, or transformers rather, I'm sorry. Or those large things on poles, which unless they put the electric underground, most likely it's not going to go away. If those poles are there, then the Verizons and Comcast will continue leaving their wires on the poles. I could be wrong, but just,
Right.
that's just my thoughts on everything that we see.
Right. I'm sure it's a mix, like
Yeah.
everything else, you
I,
know?
I think one thing that is definitely should be cleaned up is abandoned wires that are on the ground. I see a lot of times work is done, wires are dropped to the ground, and they're left there for weeks. I'm not sure how, maybe a question is, if a citizen sees abandoned wires on the ground, who do they call in the township to just, and I'm talking about simply picking up the wires and disposing of them. But who's the right person? Because if it belongs to, say, Verizon, are they the only ones allowed to pick it up? Or can Radnor Township with the trash truck, when they're coming around, throw it in? But I'm talking about truly wires that were cut because they were replaced and left on the ground. And I think it just gets forgotten about and it gets left. But I think that is something that is easily should be addressed, and it's very clear cut that is not in use anymore.
Right, right. Yeah, that's a big part of it. I mean, there are wires hanging from a pole that just, it's still on the pole, but then it's hanging down into the ground. And
Right,
a
right, and
citizen doesn't want to pick that up or deal with it.
Or they can't because the other side's attached to a pole.
Exactly.
And I think that's a very clear example of equipment that's not in use, right? If the other end is not connected to anything, then it's really, really not in use. And most likely will not be reused. So what's the best path for a citizen to call? Who do they call to say this needs to be dealt with without getting an answer from the township that says, go call Verizon, and I'm sure Verizon will tell you or ask you, what's your account number? Can I enter you a ticket? That's what's going to happen if you call Verizon. So I think that's something that needs to be addressed.
Right.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, one of the possible solutions, or one way to get some of the answers to these questions is, previously, in addition to having the PEG channel representatives report, we would have representatives of Verizon and Comcast come to these meetings and give reports. So perhaps we can schedule an agenda item around identifying these obsolete pieces of equipment and also some of the other questions you identified, Suzette, in terms of the, the numbers of people who in the township, if there are any at this point, that aren't provided service by either Comcast or Verizon based upon this language that was in the franchise agreement for Comcast, whether there are still any such, residents or residences that are, do not have those services, and how we go about rectifying that situation. So perhaps what we need to do is going forward for the next meeting, or a future meeting, maybe not the next meeting, but a future meeting, have an agenda item where we specifically invite, with plenty of time, representatives of Comcast and Verizon to appear and ask them some of these questions. As far as identifying the obsolete equipment, I would think that would be an engineering, to your point, an engineering task. And hopefully somebody on the, in the township, in terms of a township engineering staff member, would have the ability to take some kind of survey and identify those things.
Yeah, I don't think someone in the township could identify equipment as not being in use. They may have a better ability to identify something that is potentially not in use. But I don't think anyone except for the actual company would be able to say, yes, that's in use or not in use. I think it would be difficult for us to look up on a poll and tell what's in use or not in use. It may be a good candidate. We may be able to identify good candidates of, well, this is not in use because there's no wires going to it, or, it's very rusty and it's been like that for 15 years, things like that.
There's actually two parts to my comment, and one is, the first part of my comment with adding this to 3.8 of this agreement was that I'd like to see removal of obsolete equipment officially added to the agreements so that going forward, as a contract, the company knows if you're putting something in that's new, take away the old stuff and get rid of the garbage because we don't want it hanging out here for eternity type of thing, right? But to your point, Peter, the other part is, what do we do with the, the carnage that's already here and like the Mall Bell stuff and all of that, right? So there's two parts to the equation, and one's probably more of an township engineering department or, and talking with Comcast reps to say like, well, can we put together some kind of plan to get rid of the stuff that's out there? But for the next 10-year agreement, let's put it right in there that if you do something in the township, you got to take away the old stuff.
Yeah,
You know.
and I think the other part is the real obvious stuff. So the cable that's laying in the street,
Right.
not connected to anything, there shouldn't be any, the companies shouldn't have any, oh, we have to go back and see. It's obvious it's trash, pick up your trash.
And there is a couple places in this agreement that it's laced through that once a grievance or a complaint reaches the township has a certain number of days to report it to Comcast or Verizon, whichever it might be, and they have a certain number of days to respond to the grievance. However, I don't think that process is really clear to residents, and I don't think that, obviously it's not, because this stuff is just going on and, nobody's paying much attention to it. And the other part of it is that there are points throughout this agreement that say that both of them, or whoever it is, Comcast or Verizon, should have a certain amount of time to respond to the township
Right.
if the township were to ask for a report on obsolete equipment, on, whatever it might be, any kind of report. And, but the way the agreement's written, we have to ask for these reports. And to Brian's point, like, we need to, as a council, maybe put it on our agenda once a year or whatever it might be, to just ask. I'm not saying that the agenda, that part of the agreement needs to be changed. I don't think we need mandatory meetings if nothing's going wrong, right? But we need to exercise our voice to ask them to come in and report to us when we see that something isn't right. Or maybe we just want to report once a year, but we have to ask for it then. That's the way the agreement's written, that we
Right.
need to ask.
Well, the first thing you need to do is to identify who owns what. Somebody has to do that first. I mean, I had a wire laying on my property for months, and it was like, well, it was Verizon, it was Comcast, so I just cut the wire myself, roll it up and put it in the trash. That's not what that's me, though. I wouldn't expect everyone to do that. So someone has to identify which is which. And, like Brian said, they used to be responsible to come out and explain to us, and we could say there's a problem, and they would go out and maybe get to it. But that's the issue now. The stuff is so old, I don't know who owns what anymore. Because I see it on poles. I live on Sproul Road, so I see stuff hanging around.
Right.
You can't expect the township to go and identify it, So it's a good point, excellent point.
I mean, Peter, as somebody who has experience in the business, so to speak, would you have any ideas or thoughts on how, like, a task like that would be best approached in terms of taking that inventory? Like, I'm thinking that there must be a township engineer or somebody in the engineering group that would have some sense. They would maybe not know if they...
I think, I'm not sure who the township engineer is, so I won't speak for them, but I think with a little bit knowledge. From my humble experience, I could look at poles and tell you what's electric, what's Comcast, what's Verizon, by the way the wires look and what they connect to. From there, if you see lines hanging, then you know, especially if you can see it, right, and it's not sparking on the ground, it's not electric, and fiber is obviously different than coax. So then you know who to call. If now a citizen, like John's experience, would be more difficult. Most people don't want to touch a wire because they don't know what it is. It may be more difficult to tell what it is. I think from a citizen's perspective, if they call the township, it gets tricky. People don't want to spend time to come out and check wires, but I think from a citizen's perspective, they're not going to be able to tell what's what. But if it's hanging down or on the ground, they probably want someone to call. And I didn't know if they called Verizon, even if they knew it was Verizon, they called Verizon, what would happen is they would ask for their account number and treat it as a ticket. And it would end up going nowhere. So I think the best route is if they would call the township, and the township then interacts with Verizon that has the agreement, where we say, hey, here's the agreement that says come clean up your stuff.
Just one question. The Cohen Group, who advises our township, advises many townships throughout the state, and I wonder if we could ask them, how does this function in other townships, and kind of do it that same way, since
Yeah, I think it's a good
there are
idea.
consultants.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, Ian.
There's one more point that I have with the agreement that seems minor compared to these other points, but in section 4.1b, we talk about the office hours and telephone availability of Comcast or Verizon. And 10 years ago, the expectation in 4.1b is that the subscriber wait time shall not exceed 30 seconds after the connection is made. If the call needs to be transferred, transfer time shall not exceed 30 seconds. These standards shall be met no less than 90% of the time measured on a quarterly basis. Has anyone ever waited for Comcast or Verizon for 30 seconds?
Is it the connection time, or is it the talk
This
to a
is
person?
when you call Verizon and say, you're waiting for someone to help you.
That comes on in 30 seconds.
Have you ever waited longer than 30 seconds? I mean, I'm just saying it needs to be updated. I don't know what it needs to be updated to, but that's not what's happening in today's world. I also know that, if you're not a Verizon customer and you try to call them, it's virtually impossible to talk to someone, and vice versa.
Right.
I mean,
yes.
So that puts a lot more of the onus of grievances, complaints on the township.
Right. That's why I think for the average person who really doesn't know what's what, that they have to call the township. It just makes it a lot easier, and then we can enforce the franchise agreement.
Right. I mean, all of my points are basically geared around the fact that I just love Radnor to death. It's the most amazing township, I believe, in Pennsylvania. It's affluent. It's the rock star township. We promote that we're the best on our promotional signs and everything, and yet we have this obsolete wire thing going on where we have an ice storm and we're down for 4 days. That doesn't happen other places because a lot of other places have underground utilities now. Granted, it goes from electrical followed by these guys. But we need to start addressing this.
You're addressing the removal of the obsolete equipment, but on top of that, you mean addressing the idea of like trying to get everything underground, or what?
Well, that's another step that I didn't really bring up, but there is a section in this agreement too that talks about underground equipment being installed, and it basically says, you know, whether it's funded through the township or privately, or, you know, it goes through the different ways to fund it, but it says that, you know, Comcast, or, and this is Comcast's agreement, so but Comcast will, you know, comply with whatever the township directs. I'm not to say whether the residents want underground or not, and I don't know how to make that determination. Again, to me, it looks prettier. The Brain Business District looks so much better without all the poles. Maybe it's something that the township needs to ask residents if they want to spend money on. I'm not sure how that's a bigger can of worms than what I'm addressing with the obsolete equipment.
Any other comments on this agenda item? Or-
No.
Well, I think we've had a good discussion, and I think it does, you've made good points, I think, Suzette, in terms of some of the negotiating items. I think this is such a, you know, the agreement is extensive, and, you know, I think there's a lot of stuff to move forward on in terms of the removal of obsolete equipment and whatnot, and I think that, you know, we'll need to have this as an agenda item next time as well, and just in terms of additional points that may come to mind as far as negotiating points for the Verizon agreement, and also, I think, you know, perhaps seeing in the interim if we can kind of figure out whether there is some way, short of reaching out to the representatives of the two utilities, if there's anybody in the township that has any sense or any idea or has any capability of identifying where these sort of obsolete equipment problems are. And then we're, you know, putting us in a position to get representatives in here and to question them about that, and also to question them, to Peter's earlier point, question them about residents who may or may not have access to the utilities based upon their location. So, good discussion. Moving on, the next item, agenda item is number 5, and that is the, you know, we discussed at the last meeting the idea, and this again is going to be an ongoing item, I think, for some time, because we're still sort of feeling our way, and we still have to sort of get corroboration and confirmation from other entities as to what exactly we're doing in certain contexts, as far as like what is our role, how much leeway do we have, and so on. But we're revisiting the current description and mission statement of the Citizens Communication Council, which is found on the township website. You know, we had agreed that following the last meeting, we would sort of take a look at that, the current description and mission statement, and see, you know, solicit comments from the council members as far as what they think could and should be revised, or, you know, changed or added or whatnot. So I'd like to hear what kinds of comments people have on with respect to the description and mission statement.
Well, I do have a lot of comments, but I don't need to go first. Or I can go first.
Well, if you would like to go first, please do so, Ian.
Okay. So the Citizens Communication Council, it lists when we have our meetings, the third Wednesday at 6:30 in this room. It lists the council members, Art Hartel as chair. It should say that Brian is the vice chair, and John has volunteered to be secretary, so that needs to get updated. And then we should also have the year that each of us were appointed, so we have our terms. I think that's useful to have for the public. And then the section about the council really gives some history. And then 6 tasks: advising the board and township staff on policy. And I'll just read the verbs: reviewing and negotiating cable franchise right-of-way, other communication agreements, making appropriate recommendations. The third one, recommending appropriate policies and procedures governing the use and operation of the township's public, educational, and governmental television access channels. 4, evaluating applications and plans submitted for cell towers, antenna systems, microcell, other communications facilities. A little bit more there, but I'm just trying to read the beginning. Number 5, evaluating applications and plans submitted for the placement of cell towers, distributed antenna systems, microcell, et cetera. And then 6, considering complaints dealing with cable television and other communication issues in the township and make appropriate referrals and recommendations. As far as my opinion about those, I think all of those are fine and don't need to be changed or even added to. I think that's enough of a mission for this particular committee. It also says that Molly Gallagher is our township staff liaison. And so that's what we have so far. The thing that I really would like to add to this list of the mission and objectives of the Citizens Communication Council is really something that applies broadly to all of our boards and commissions, but I don't know, we have such great volunteers on all of our boards and commissions, including this council, I would say, is to really articulate the process for the full management of volunteers of boards and commissions. So we kind of do this. It's not fully articulated, but one of my backgrounds is in volunteer management and nonprofit management. And so adding an attendance policy, I've looked at these kinds of policies for boards and commissions at other townships nearby. And so some have an attendance policy such as 4 or more absences, the person should be removed from the board by the township manager, and there's a process for that, so that then if you're trying to achieve a quorum, you could do it, because, I mean, some people, maybe it was more of a commitment than they were able to manage, that kind of thing. The members represent the community, and so if someone on our council, for example, or any other board or commission is expressing a personal opinion, that's fine to share, but then they should say that they're expressing their personal opinion. We should have a conflict of interest policy. In another nonprofit that I'm involved in, we sign an annual statement declaring that if we have any kind of a conflict of interest, we set that out on the form, and you look at it every year to make sure, are you certain that you don't have a conflict of interest and should step down from that particular board or commission, and that no member should benefit from a service by being on for hours on the CCC. Use of township resources, all members should make requests to the chair of the board or commission and not to the township staff, so that everything is going through the chair of the board or commission. In the same way, interaction with media, the chairperson would coordinate any communication with the media. I would think even in our township that any interaction with the media would be coordinated through Molly Gallagher or even the township manager, just so things are very clear. It would be incumbent on each member of a board or commission to be aware of the other roles that the other boards and commissions play, so we know when we might need to work together, which we recently did with the Planning Commission. Sometimes we might overlap with the zoning hearing board, so really educating ourselves or having that process done with the township. Each member should be familiar with Robert's Rules of Order. An agenda should be provided in a timely manner before the meeting and posted on the website. Let's see, we need rules in terms of a quorum. An advisory board can meet without a quorum. We need to approve minutes and have them in advance of the meeting so we can read them over, so that we can approve them. The chair can impose time limits on items for discussion so that the agenda is moved along in a productive way. There should be a motion to adjourn, and everyone should vote on that. adhering to sunshine laws, what is the process to make a recommendation to the Board of Commissioners, what would be a conflict resolution protocol that we could adopt. So these are some of them, and I can write this up and even maybe for the next meeting so that everybody could look at those, but it really comes under the overarching heading of articulating that process for the full management of volunteers of boards and commissions. One of the things that is probably my mantra, one of my mantras, is I think our residents who volunteer on these boards and commissions are so amazing. They have amazing expertise. They give hours and hours and hours of their time. And the more that we can make the process more efficient and productive, the better our boards and commissions are going to be to serve the residents. So I'm just a real champion of residents who volunteer for these boards and commissions. The return on investment for our township, I don't even know what that dollar amount would be, the value that we get from our residents who serve in this way. So that's probably my big comment. And then, I just think that this council has enough work to do that we shouldn't really add any more tasks. And if we do, we should be careful what we add, because what's on here is already a lot.
One of the things
Ann,
I could
thank
say
you. Oh, I'm
regarding
sorry.
all the process things, Ann, is a lot of the points you made are actually addressed in the bigger umbrella of Radnor Township, in its boards and commissions and all of that. So we just need to, make sure everybody who's new adheres to it and understands it. Some of them I'm not sure of. I don't know all the different rules, but I know a lot of them are covered already in what we're to be doing as far as process and running of meetings and all of that, the sunshine law, I'd have to go through your list, but yeah, I think we'd have to kind of cross-pollinate and make sure that, we're not duplicating efforts, because it might already be in place.
Yeah,
And-
just on that point.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Some townships have a handbook that is given out to volunteers on boards and commissions, and I don't think we're as far along as that, where everything is in one place. I think we do mostly everything very well, but it's not articulated. So that's my point, that we should really articulate it, and it should be in a handbook to give to the volunteer resident who joins a board or commission.
Thank you, Ann. I couldn't write as fast as you were speaking, so hopefully you can give me your notes. But I think it's important, and I think you did say this, that we should have a very good relationship with the Board of Commissioners. And when I first started in this adventure some years ago before COVID, we did have that relationship, and I think it's imperative that we still have that, that status with the commissioners, where we're a voice, a liaison, somebody that can provide, and I think that you've outlined it that way, that, that we have that kind of mobility. So, but I couldn't write that fast.
I just have one question. On one of the points there, evaluating applications, and I know we discussed this briefly before, is expectation that the board reviews it, someone on the township reviews it, or in conjunction?
Well, it's not 100% clear. The ordinance does provide that we have a role in reviewing applications, but it's not spelled out as to what extent, what authority we have to, we can, I guess, provide input or opinion, but beyond that, it really isn't very well specified. So we are specifically identified as having a role in reviewing, and that all applications will be forwarded to us, and I believe to the Planning Commission, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay.
There's a township officer who's designated as receiving the applications, and then automatically is supposed to share them with, I believe it's with us and with the Planning Commission, if I'm
Okay,
not
because
mistaken.
if I recall correctly, the applicants, there's a certain time limit that the township has, otherwise it is deemed approved. And I would hate that if we're all not able to review it, then we're not really enforcing or, the process there isn't really being used.
Right, I mean, if I recall correctly, it was like a 30-day review
Right.
period. And if there wasn't a response given to the applicant within 30 days, that it would be presumed to be
So,
approved.
I think the ideal scenario is that there's I guess this is the township manager. There's a designated full-time, hopefully, employee that is reviewing these as soon as possible, and then we're just oversight to help review.
I believe so,
Okay.
yeah. I believe, we're not a designated sort of approval authority or anything. We're just,
Okay.
the idea
Okay.
is we will get copies of the applications and we will have the opportunity to review and weigh in on them to the extent
Okay.
that we have comment or recommendations.
All right, great, thank you.
I think, yeah, and to your point about the statement, I mean, it would be helpful, I think, you would offer to, and I think we would accept your offer to write up your thoughts on the mission and purpose of this council. And, perhaps, Suzette, you were talking about sort of an umbrella document or whatnot, if you could maybe obtain what you were referencing from the township and sharing that as far as if there is some kind of document.
I'd have to do a little research myself, but I remember when joining this council, there were documents and rules for the township in general, for all the, all the volunteer board positions, councils, and committees. There were rules and there were policy procedures that were recommended and followed. I'd have to research a little bit and see. Are you familiar with what I'm talking about, Molly?
I'm not, only because I haven't been here all this long, and this is my first staff liaison opportunity, but I can help you find out. I can look into that tomorrow with Peggy Hagan, who'd likely know.
Right, okay, very good, thank you.
Sure.
That would be great. If you find anything, please share it with us, and we can review that in the context of Ann's comments and summary.
Yeah, and again, this is something that we can look at next month's meeting, but what I can do is write up what I read through rather quickly and just have it as an addendum for the minutes. Okay. Okay. All right,
I just
thank
had one comment too on the roles and responsibilities of the council. And it speaks somewhat to, the point we talked about earlier with the obsolete equipment and all of that. This area of technology is changing rapidly. And probably, 10, 20 years ago, we didn't need to talk about removing obsolete equipment from Ma Bell or Verizon or Comcast because it was what we used. We had cable TV, we had phone lines, and that was it. And it changed rapidly, and now things are changing again. And the bullet points for our directives for this council do specify some equipments like cell towers, distribution antenna systems, microcells, et cetera. And one day, probably not in the not too distant future, that's going to be obsolete too. So I would just recommend that we probably revisit this a little bit more often than most other commissions because of the technology, the impact of technology on our directives. When we're talking about specific equipment, who knows what we'll be talking about in 5 years? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. Because it is, to your point, it's a changing area, and, we have 5G is being rolled out now, but my understanding there's, and Peter, I'm sure would know better, but there's we're already beyond 5G, correct?
Yeah, 6G is already in development.
Oh, great.
And it includes satellites.
Okay, so can we get rid of the cell towers and all these little words?
Unfortunately not.
How do we inspect satellites?
I'll be on the committee.
All right. Okay, I think we've agreed on our course of action with respect to the CCC description and mission statement. I don't think there are any other comments or questions on that. Any new business to discuss? I don't believe so. And there are no members of the public here to participate, so there's no public participation. So I will let viewers know that our next meeting is scheduled for Wednesday, November 16th, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. right here in the Radnor Shire Room and online on your television. So on that note, I would move to adjourn the meeting. All in favor?
Second.
Meeting is adjourned. Thank you.